Hi. So it's 12 o'clock. Any non-German speaking folks here? That's great. So I forced to train my English. Yeah. Last people are coming in. Take a seat. So while people are seating, I can introduce myself. And it looks like I have to go a little bit more closer. It actually looks like it lags a little bit. So let's hope that the Wi-Fi god is stable. I will try it again. So, okay. Great. So, yeah, hi, I'm Soenke. This is my Twitter handle, S0Enke. I'm the co-founder of Superlumina. We are a small consultancy based in Hamburg, and we are focusing on public cloud, AWS, and serverless. And there's also an announcement I have to make. We are also organizing the Serverless Days, which is a conference also focusing on serverless technologies. And yeah, so there's a date, February 15th, save the date, call for papers, and ticket stuff will start soon. We're also looking for sponsors, just ping us. Yeah, so please save the date. And actually something here is, I think it's the Wi-Fi. Okay, let's try. Might be a little bit bumpy because this Google stuff doesn't work offline so good. Okay, so agenda. What's serverless? Then we will have a look at the evolution of backend programming. Then we will have a look what developers, so likely maybe you, have to unlearn with serverless and also have to learn. Then we will have a look why unlearning can be hard in organizations, and then we will have a look at strategies how to amplify unlearning or learning and how to overcome resistance to learning. It's a little bit like overcome resistance. It's a little bit, yeah, usually there shouldn't be resistance. Let's have a look. So, what's serverless? And here's the definition. It says serverless solution is one that costs you nothing to run if nobody is using it, excluding data storage. So this means if I have no users, then I don't pay anything or no traffic. So I can build the best web application in the world. But if there are no users, it should cost nothing. So if I deploy my serverless application into AWS or Google or whatever, then as soon as traffic hits it, I will pay for it. Serverless is also, serverless is not function as a service. So function as a service is something like Lambda or Google Cloud Functions and so on. Who have used Lambda or Google Cloud Functions something already? Okay, a few of you, great. Because serverless means actually serviceful. So it means we want to use as many services from our cloud provider as possible in order to focus on our core software. And actually there are still servers in serverless, because this is usually one question or comment. So to explain what will happen with serverless or what happens all the time, we have to have a look at evolution. and we have to have a look at how things evolve. And as an example, I have the evolution of electrical power. So it started with something like a Faraday disk. We call it genesis here. So Faraday, or I don't know exactly, maybe there are more knowledgeable people among you. Yeah, so it started somehow with a Faraday disk, then some more custom built stuff happened with some magnets and so on, and then there was a first product. It was called the Siemens Dynamo, at least this is what I found out while researching. And then, I don't know exactly, like 100 or 200 years later, we had electrical power, and we can just use power plugs. So this is called commodity. So it's everywhere. We can just use this. We don't care anymore about the details. Actually, as I said, usually everything evolves. So let's have a look at the evolution of compute. First, there was a computer like this. It was actually an analog computer. Then we had some custom-built examples. Small detail here, woman engineers. Yeah, and then we got a product, servers, or even before mainframes and stuff like that. And then in 2006 or so, Amazon came. Bam, EC2 commodity. Now credit card, commodity. We don't care about the details anymore. We just use an API. So this is how more or less everything evolves. And it's evolution, so actually we can't, we might be able to slow it down or to speed it up, but it's evolution, so we can't do anything about it. It usually happens like this. So everything evolves to commodity. And now let's have a look at a typical web backend. So usually, or we should always start with a customer or user need. Otherwise we shouldn't build an application. Or it's just for fun in your spare time. But as a company we should usually have customers, or at least soon to be customers. And then we have an application, and this application is custom built. So this application needs, so we are building now something like a value stream map here. This needs a runtime execution. This could be whatever your execution is. Maybe you already are in Lambda, or it's in Docker, or it's on EC2 machines, or whatever. Then usually we have something like a login management system. In this case, so this is just an example, it might be custom built, so we build it on our own. Then we have something like an event bus or whatever, queuing system, streams, event streams, so and so on. And an API endpoint, of course, because actually everything talks to our API endpoint. So this is just the backend app. All this stuff might need a database, it might need compute, and it might need storage and network and so on. So this is a little bit simplistic example here. And all the stuff needs power. And power is already commodity, and currently we might use just products for databases, compute, and storage. So let's have a look here, what happened here. And this was what I call the first cloud wave, like in the 2000s, or in the last 10 years. So what happened here is Amazon and the public cloud providers came and did this, bam, it's now commodity. So this actually happened to operations teams. Your ops team is there, and the cloud provider is there, and in between them there's an API. So let's have a look what will happen or is currently happening with the next wave. And this is actually happening. the same. We go from custom build and product to commodity. So now the API is here. Developer duty, cloud provider duty. And again, power plug. So this means all the stuff there is now like, we use it, we don't care about the details anymore. So it goes lower, it's not that customer visible anymore, they get invisible subsystem. For a typical web application, there might be like, for example, if you are a login, like if you are auth0, then your main product is a login system, so you might still have it custom built. But usually for our, like if we are building an end user facing application, it usually, or in the future, or people are already currently building stuff like that, applications will probably look like this. So, and then there's the question, okay, what does serverless take away from developers? So, and it's a little bit like take away, and then I made a small list. It's not really comprehensive. So, can we see it? Yeah, like here is something like a category in the column, and in the in this column, and here in the rows I have something like, okay, this is what we used to do, is like library self-hosted stuff, and now we're getting services from our cloud providers, as an example from AWS and Google. We could also put Microsoft maybe there and others, IBM for example. Those are usually the four notable ones. Yeah, so not so this is and we are soon looking at what I mean with taking away. And then I also have like a stereotype. So we could now say, okay, there's the server full versus the serverless developer. And what happens here? So this is a stereotype, so it's extremes. So you might be offended with this, but this is okay. Was my this was what I intended. So let's have a look here at sometimes words. So what I call the server full developers, they are using products and libraries. They might like to build their own stuff, so I call it like not invented here. They might have their favorite tech like I build everything with Redis, or I always use Erlang, or I always use Kafka, or I always use whatever, and throw it at my problem. Thus they might be a single tech expert. On the other hand, the serverless developer, they use cloud provider services. They always try to use stuff from their cloud provider, and they are more generalists or experts of how to use the building blocks of the cloud provider. And yeah, there are a few other ones like now, and we are more and more going to developing in the cloud, but this is like details. And another thing is, for example, that serverless will more or less enforce 12-factor, which means you cannot have state, for example, in your applications, or it's at least not in your runtime, because or it will be wiped out every whatever minutes. Okay, so yeah, this is like a non-complete list, but I think the main point is here that the usage goes from products and libraries to services, and you would say, so what? And my hypothesis is that the server full folks who like to build their own stuff, or like to use their favorite tech, what they used 10 years, or what they have been using for 10 years or whatever, will get into trouble. And for this, we have to look at how organizations learn, and I have to look at the time. How do organizations learn? And the fun thing here is organizations are there to be resistant to learning. And you would say, what? And I say, depending on the learning, so organizations depend on a resistance to learn in order to do the daily work. Otherwise, you would have complete chaos if everybody just would learn all the time something or experiment or whatever. And so how could it look like how organizations learn? You have a stable environment, you do your business as usual, you go into your office, drink your coffee, do stuff on your computer, you go home. And learning is actually destabilization of your system. This means you might learn new habits, routines, and reactions. And after these new habits or routines have somehow proved successful, you can unlearn the old habits and you get the new business as usual. Okay, sounds easy, and the problem is it isn't, because there are actually many barriers to learning and unlearning, and this is actually people and teams and systems. So as you see, I like lists. I give you a few seconds, just look around here. So this is called knowledge barriers or information pathologies. This is coming from a doctor thesis in psychology. So actually this is all psychology. So what we could see here, so for example, there's not invented here, there's routine blindness, or what we call in Germany is Betriebsblindheit, Dunning-Kruger effect. Who has heard of this one? A few ones, that's great. So Dunning-Kruger effect says that incompetent people are too incompetent to see their own incompetence. Okay, so there's much stuff going on here. And one of the main problems is that knowledge is a part of human identity. So I have an example here. So consider you have been using RabbitMQ for 10 years now, and now there's AWS coming and say, hey, just use SQS. And you're really an expert in RabbitMQ. You know all the details. You have implemented it everywhere in your company, and so on. So this might really be a problem for this people, team, or person. Or I have a little quote here. The acceptance and valuation of external knowledge, in this case might be the public cloud provider, can be perceived by insiders as a degradation of the own achievements, expertise, and competence of the in-group. In consequence, individuals tend to reject external ideas to defend their group identity. This is actually one definition of the not invented here syndrome. 15 minutes, okay, thank you. Or a little bit more positive. As developers, we aren't generally conscious that we are spending so much time solving technology problems until someone, maybe AWS, takes those problems away from us and narrows our focus further on the business problems. So unlearning can be a painful experience, and this is also because learning is actually can be in conflict with unknown outcome. So conflicts in your team or organizations can arise because of timing or magnitude of a change. So just as an example, maybe there are better ones, like you're in an emergency room and someone says, hey, let's conduct an experiment. Might be not a good timing for an experiment. So this is like like organizations are there to be resistant to learning, because in this situation they might just use their checklists and their experience, but might also do small experiments, but not like a bigger one, like, okay, what happens if I pull out this, whatever. And this is also a learning I had. We've always done it this way. You might have heard it in Germany. There's always this Beamtendreisatz. Is a survival reflex of an organization and people. So this is really, and this is a fact. This is not something, people are not that way because they are dumb or they just want to do their jobs. So if we want people to do active learning, then they have to have an environment where they control how to learn. Otherwise they will suffering from passive learning if you just push them to whatever workshops. Please go to this AWS workshop because we are now migrating everything to AWS, and when you tell that to a system administrator or developer who have been doing serverful stuff for 20 years, then they might suffer from passive learning. So we need some way of organized unlearning, and for that we need a routine to cancel routines. So to have a really ordered way. So let's have a look what we can do. So this is actually what, so the last part was problem research, now the solution research that I did. And I also tried out some of these stuff already in practice. So, and I did a small triangle here. It's not the Maslow pyramid, but something like this. So first, as an organization, we should need we should have a knowledge strategy. So a competent organization knows when and what to learn. It has some. There could be some general questions. For example, why do I need which knowledge? What organizational value can be created through which new revised knowledge? What future capability do we acquire through which organizational expertise? For example, is racking servers or knowing the details of RabbitMQ really a future capability that our company needs? So let's have a look back at our map. Actually, this was called a Wortley map, this one. And a knowledge what I found out is that actually this could be used as a knowledge strategy because there's the API, we already had this, so we could say, hey, let's focus there and have something like what the books tell us is positive ignorance. It means we don't need to know it. So we know that it's there, but we don't need to know it. It's what Rumsfeld, I guess, called known unknown. And so we could, as a strategy, say, okay, we can unlearn the details and we can focus on learning the usage of the commodity building blocks. So all the stuff there, login user management, API endpoint, blah, 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 is now commodity. Then we can also have a look at which knowledge to keep, because there will still be knowledge which is more or less universal, even with serverless. And once again, I have a list, but this is more like, for example, ports and adapters, hexagonal architecture, the test pyramid. This is all stuff which is really generic knowledge, which will maybe not even go away with the next wave, whatever this will be after serverless. Domain-driven design is also always like architecture, software architecture, design patterns, unit tests, CAP theorem, fallacies of distributed computing. This is really fallacies of distributed computing are now more important than ever. And also SQL injection doesn't go away, and so on. So knowledge strategy. When we have knowledge strategy, we know what to build in-house and what to outsource. We also know what to learn, unlearn, and to keep. The next thing we need to do, we need to have in order to have successful unlearning in organizations is actually safety for people. So first we need psychological safety, then we need physical safety also, because there are also other, so as developers we usually don't get injured when doing our jobs, but might also happen. And then we also need job security, and this is really important because once again, if you see that knowledge is part of the identity of people, and you are and with unlearning you are taking away a part of the identity, then they might feel threatened, and so they have to have the promise that their job will still be there in the new world. Okay, this was safety for people, and the next thing that we need is team and personal development. We need some, for example, it helps to have coaches, and it helps to have, for example, they could help the team in letting go, like, oh my god, what happens if all my data are in AWS, and then they could do something like asking the team questions so they do more research or whatever. And we also have to have the right incentives here for our teams, because with the wrong incentives all the stuff might not work. And I have some examples that are made up, but which might work. I'm really open to feedback here. So one incentive, or imagine you're in your annual review meeting, and one incentive could be, okay, I freed up so and so much time by outsourcing stuff to our cloud provider, and so I could focus more on our main product, or we used Service X instead of building, installing and maintaining our own stuff. We refactored architecture code with measurable positive impact on the cloud provider bill. This is really interesting, because remember, serverless means if you don't use it or nobody uses it, it doesn't cost money. But if somebody uses it will cost money. But you can now do refactoring, something like I use Service X instead of Service Y, and this might have an immediate impact. So as soon as you deploy it, you can see the impact on your cloud provider bill. And this is also new. This is called low obscurity of cost. So, and in the old world we had a high obscurity of cost, because there were already servers racked and nobody cared if they idle or don't idle. Or for example, I influence other folks to not roll their own solution, but proudly found stuff elsewhere. So this is just some examples I had. So incentives are really important, and so on. So this is just things I made up, and then we now have all this stuff, and you would say, okay, but now how do we unlearn? And my question is, how can we unlearn without destabilizing the current system, which earns the money, or which does have some processes which somehow work? And so how could a routine to cancel routines look like? And for this I found the experiments. So this sounds a little bit okay, you might be now a little bit disappointed that there's only experiments, but it means disciplined unlearning and experimentation. And actually, now that we have a knowledge strategy, we can experiment towards this strategy or vision, and we can also have maybe small wins. So what I found there is Toyota Kata. Who knows this? Not so many. That's great. So you can actually learn something. So how does Toyota Kata? Sorry, I hadn't the time to do this in an animation. The next people will get this as an animation. You will now have to suffer from my pointer here. So we have the first one is we want to have a direction or challenge. This could be our knowledge strategy or vision. Then the second one is we look at the current condition, what's happening now, and then we can establish a target condition, and we can then conduct experiments to get there. So, and actually experiments can also go in the wrong direction, because it's experiments, so they should sometimes fail, otherwise you don't have experiments. yeah, this is actually Toyota Kata. Now you would say, okay, okay, so what? And I say, I made up another example here, and the example is that we need our challenge or true north or vision or however you call it, and we could say, okay, we want to focus on customer and user needs, and this doesn't imply serverless. You could do this in another way if you would know it. Then we could say, okay, we have a current condition we already measured, so maybe the first step would be to measure it. Of our work is toil, grunt work, bug fixing, incident and outages. And then we could say, okay, our next target condition should be, let's go down to 50%. And then, if we analyzed it already, we could say, okay, the current obstacle which we have is our login system causes half of the bugs and outages. And the experiment we could conduct as a team is maybe look for managed alternatives for login user management, because we believe that then our outages will go away. And we might learn after we did this experiment that our our cloud provider AWS offers a service, could be anything, or Google, or and so on. So, and then they could go into the next iteration. After they learned it, they could maybe start a proof of concept and how to do it. And this is like a really structured way. So usually they have like templates for that, or there are templates for that, how to fill in this stuff. You can put it on your Scrum or Kanban or whatever board, and then you don't have only our work in progress, but you also have experiments in progress. And this is really a great, so there's a book out there, and there are many talks about it. So this is really a great structured way to do experimenting. And the interesting thing is that it's directed towards the vision or strategy you had from your knowledge strategy. Yeah, so this is actually all that I got, and just to apply my own theorem of finding stuff elsewhere and being proud. There's also this list of concepts that are used here. So there's systemic knowledge management use. This is like the German branch of all the folks. Then there's the Wortley mapping. Wortley mapping is the maps that you saw with the value stream and the evolution. There's organizational psychology. This was this awesome list of knowledge barriers. And there are learning organizations, Agris and Schoen, and system thinking, Peter Senge, Deming, and the Toyota Kata. And also defensive routines, which is currently my main research focus, but I didn't have the time to read the books yet. So this is actually the stuff. So all the stuff that I showed you is nothing I made up. It's all proudly found elsewhere. Yeah, and so recap: have a knowledge strategy, have safety for people, have team and personal development, and you can also conduct experiments without all this other stuff, but then they will have might not have that much of traction, because like the system wouldn't support it, or most likely not support it. Yeah, and that's all I got. Thank you. Okay, questions? One question. Don't know if you have a mic.
How do you see this fitting in with the move to containerization? Specifically, the obvious downside of serverless cloud-provided solutions are that they are proprietary. You don't get them as open source options. You can't just take a nice open source repo, have it containerized. So in a way, it might be an impediment to crowding found it elsewhere.
So the question was, how does this apply, or what I understood was how does this apply to containers and open source technology? And I would say this is, when we go back to this map, I would say, okay, you are currently now using stuff as a product, whereas the, for example, let's this is example of, we have our login management system, and let's just go back. Where is it? Where's the, so for example, let's get away the power plug. I would say that everything here, which you use as which you put into a container as an open source product, and what the cloud providers now offer more and more is competing services. So the point is, what is your point of using a product and not the commodity building block? Is it something that is worth to maintain it on your own? Or this would be my question back to you. Or what is the reason not to use the commodity building block, for example, a Cognito user pool or Zero or Firebase? Is there some feature in your own rolled solution which is worse because your users will have a more positive, you might not be able to build, for example, a feature because something is missing in the commodity building block? So this would be my question. Yes?
Sorry.
No.
Yeah. My answer to that would just be that even if the serverless solution might be somewhat superior, it's also a mechanism by which Amazon can package up its intellectual property and gain a royalty on it. And so the advantage would be not paying that royalty and instead using an open source solution that a lot of people are contributing towards.
Yes. So what? Yes. So this goes into the. I would say this goes into the discussion of cloud provider and vendor lock-in, and I always say, okay, there's not only vendor lock-in, there's also companies should be aware that there are more lock-ins than a vendor lock-in. There's also a people lock-in. So if you have, like, now you build your own stuff into your Docker container, what happens if you get sick and nobody can actually maintain or whatever it anymore? This would usually not happen with commodity building blocks, because Amazon is so big. Even if one person gets sick there, they still have an entire team which cares about this building block. So there's not only vendor lock-in, there's also other lock-ins. For example, there's also technology lock-in. If you build everything with Redis, then you have a technology lock-in in Redis. So it's always a trade-off decision. Okay. Any more questions or feedback? Feedback that it was totally shit and you didn't understand a word is also okay for me, because this is also new stuff for me.
As a software engineer, how do you cope with the fact that it goes more towards configuring stuff than developing stuff?
So the question was, how do we cope with the stuff, and it's now more configuring stuff than developing stuff? And I would say this is not only like I would say it's a part of a mindset. It's this proudly found elsewhere mindset. When I don't so seeing not only so developers usually like to build stuff, and you can still build stuff, but it's more like plugging stuff together. But it's not like rolling your own solution anymore. So it's and I would say what for example, the incentives of your organization. So this is why I also had this incentive slide. Is it's so in order to have a successful way of learning new stuff, going the way to commodity, we also have to have incentives, which are, for example, in that your boss comes in your annual review meeting and asks, what the questions that I had, like they ask. It's not like, hey, I wrote my own database, and they say, hey, yeah, that's really cool that you now you know how to build databases. But it would be more like, hey, I focused on customer needs, so I try to not focus on everything else. This should be an incentive, and this is also what. So this is also what I hope the engineering manager or whatever also likes, that I try to focus on customer needs as a developer. Okay. Then I would say thanks again, and I guess it's lunch, and this might be also the reason that there are no questions. Thank you again.